Hi, I'd like to correct some of the comments that are saying that Boer just means farmer. Boer does not just mean farmer. It'd be akin to saying that Zionists are just Jews. That is a direct obfuscation of the term's political and historical meaning, and I would hope that most of you would see past that deception. In the case of South Africa, there is a class of white landowning elites that is in direct class antagonism with the majority of black non-property owning workers. This article is from ABC News, by the way, not some radical left publication. In South Africa, whites make up around 7% of the population of 62 million, but own approximately 70% of the private farming land, and the government says that inequality needs to be addressed. That disparity is central to our understanding of this conflict. And this statistic is even more disgusting and egregious when you consider South Africa's recent apartheid past and the broader context of the colonization of Africa as a continent, which happened at the hands of the Western European capitalist powers over the past 500 years. Yes, Africans are tired of being colonial subjects and want to decolonize their land. The new Expropriation Act gives the South African government scope to expropriate land from private parties, but only if it's in the public interest and under certain conditions. Of course, Trump says that the South African government is doing terrible things. They are reappropriating their land. They're reconstituting, reorganizing their society in a way that is antithetical to American business imperatives, in a way that is antithetical to the incentives of private capital accumulation and the interests of these industrial monopolists in the West. Capitalism requires this type of class conflict to continue so that it can continue. Trump says that the land was being confiscated from certain classes. It's the poor appropriating the land from the rich. That is intolerable when you are a capitalist. So this is not surprising at all. These events do not happen in a vacuum. What I'm telling you is that the anger that the majority of South Africans feel, the other 93% of the population, is justified, understandable, reasonable, just as you could understand the anger of the Americans fighting the British in the Revolutionary War. The point of my recent video was to show you the broader context which this event is born out of. Roughly 5 centuries of Western underdevelopment, enslavement, and subsequent colonization of the entire continent of Africa. To understand the colonial period in Africa, which began in 1880 with what's known as the Scramble for Africa, which I think is a very revealing label for that period, and ended in 1960 roughly, as well as the role of the Boer settlers, we must first distinguish between the economic partition of Africa and the political partition of Africa. And here I'm quoting Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Page 231. For a long while, South Africa was the most important raw material reservoir for the whole of imperialism. Britain was the European power which had already been entrenched in South Africa for many years when gold and diamonds were discovered in the 19th century. On the eve of the scramble for Africa we just mentioned, Britain had to come to terms with the Boer settlers, whose livelihood then came primarily from the land, and whose main interest, get this, was to see to the exploitation and domination of the African population and other groups of non-white immigrants. Therefore, the economic and political partition of Africa gave Britain the lion's share of the mineral wealth, while the Boers retained the political power necessary to institutionalize white racism. As capitalists of other nationalities entered into relations with South Africa through investment and trade, those capitalists agreed to strengthen, and did, the racist, fascist social relations of South Africa. So what he's saying is that the Boer settlers were responsible for institutionalizing white racism politically, which enabled the British Empire to further colonize South Africa and consolidate its power in the country. The reason that the majority of South Africans' anger and resentment has reached a fever pitch has everything to do with the fact that their land has been stolen from them, and every means to peacefully institute land reform has been denied. Once again, this is an example of the class struggle playing out in South Africa. It is a theme that plays out to different varying degrees and under different social conditions throughout the world.